Thank you very much. I've had the privilege once of appearing on BBC Question Time and also on BBC Any Questions. One of the things about Question Time and Any Questions is that before the cameras start rolling, they have the warm-up man who is there in order to make sure that the audience recognise when they should applaud, when they should cheer, when they should jeer, and how they should generally enjoy the 45 minutes or hour of debate ahead of them. And the terrible thing is, actually, when you talk to most of the people in the audience after Question Time or Any Questions, they always say that the warm-up man was far more entertaining, enjoyable, informative, likeable, than the panel that followed. And I fear that through my own lateness, I've allowed you all to fall in love with Tony, and then to begin to wonder, well, why on earth did he quit the stage to make way for this guy? But I can only say thank you to Tony and apologies to all of you for the slightly delayed start to my speech this morning. But I also wanted to thank Prosperity UK for organising this conference, and in particular Lord Hill of Orford, Sir Paul Marshall and Alex Hickman, who've been the dynamos who have ensured that today can occur. And they, like the team that runs Prosperity UK, are determined to bring together individuals from across the political spectrum to develop policies for Britain's future outside the European Union. And their committee, their team, is composed both of those who argue that we should leave the EU and also those who believe that we should remain. But they are united by the belief that whatever positions that individuals may have adopted in the past, it's important that all of us now try to focus on the opportunities of the future. And in choosing today to focus on agriculture, fisheries, food, and the environment more broadly, I believe that Prosperity UK and the people in this room have identified a critical range of areas where Britain has the potential to be an innovator, generating increased prosperity and setting new global gold standards in sustainability. And I want to set out in a second where I believe some of those opportunities specifically lie. But first of all, I just wanted to say a little bit about how important it is to me in this government to ensure that when we explore the opportunities of life outside the EU, we ensure that the hopes and fears of those who voted to remain are woven into our thinking and into our actions. No decision in our nation's history has enjoyed such a strong popular mandate as the decision to leave the European Union. 17.4 million people voted to take back control of this country's trade, taxes and laws. But more than 16 million of our fellow citizens voted to remain. And there is a special responsibility on those of us who argued for a leave vote and who are now charged with implementing it to ensure that the underlying reasons why so many people voted to remain are respected. Now, I think many people voted to remain because they understandably feared the economic consequences of leaving. There were warnings that a vote to leave would trigger an immediate recession and precipitate job losses. Others, I think, chose remain because they feared that a leave vote was somehow a vote to turn inwards and backwards. It was a vote for narrower horizons rather than a truly global Britain. Others, I know, were concerned that a vote to leave would strengthen the hands of separatists, particularly in Scotland, or others who wished to pursue an even more populist political platform. And critically, there were many who felt that during the time that we've been in the European Union, there have been undoubted advances in how we treat each other and the planet, which have been enshrined in law and underpinned by regulation, and all that would be put potentially at risk by a vote to leave. All of those concerns for economic justice, cultural openness, social harmony, and environmental enhancement, they're critically important. And that's why I'm glad that since the referendum result, this government has ensured that progress has been made in all of those areas. Since the referendum, Britain has recorded the best employment figures in its history, with more than 32.1 million people in work. Employment is just 66.5% in the Eurozone, compared to 74.1% in the UK. And for those in work, particularly at the bottom end of the income spectrum, wages have been rising. As the OBR pointed out this week, there's been a 7% real terms increase in pay for the poorest. More jobs for working people and better paid jobs for working people, I believe, contributes to greater economic justice. And all this has been underpinned by a shift in our economy towards export-led growth, away from what I believe was an over-reliance on domestic consumer demand in the past. In the last 12 months, exports have increased by £64.5 billion. That's a rise of 11.5%. Our service sector continues to thrive, with exports up 10.1%, and exports of goods have risen even faster, by 12.6% to £344.5 billion. And the manufacturing sector, in particular, has been making a significant contribution to this growth. So far, then, the decision to leave the EU, far from precipitating the recession which some feared, or hitting working people in the pocket, has promoted economic progress. And it's also, I believe, had a beneficial political effect. Since the British people voted to leave the EU, support for separatist parties and separation itself has declined, most notably, of course, in Scotland. And the decline in support for separation in Scotland stands in contrast to the increased support for secession in Catalonia in Spain and the growing regional tensions that we've seen in Italy in their election campaign. And indeed, it's not just support for separatist movements which has declined in Britain since the referendum. Support for populist parties has also collapsed. The United Kingdom Independence Party is now a ghost political movement, like the Luddites or the Whigs, and no populist party of the right or of the radical fringe is taking its place. And again, by way of contrast, the recent electoral success of the Five Star Movement in Italy, the Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, or the Front National in France, shows that almost alone in Europe, Britain does not have either a burgeoning populist party in Parliament or one making progress at the polls. And this ebbing in support for populist political movements has also been accompanied by a warmer and more welcoming approach by the British people to issues such as immigration. The most recent polling on migration showed that the UK was the country in the EU with the most welcoming attitudes towards migrants from outside the EU. We are the most open global nation in Europe. And that's reflected in university admissions, with the number of foreign students applying to study in the UK increasing. In 2018, there were 7,300 more applicants from overseas students, with 43,500 applications from EU students alone, an increase from the year before. And applications from some EU nations, such as Croatia, Finland, Germany, Spain, Poland, and Portugal, have continued to rise in the last few years by as much as 30%. The continuing popularity of our world-leading universities with foreign students is a win-win all round. It's a wonderful example of British soft power. It makes universities themselves more diverse. It generates earnings for the UK economy. And the fees from foreign students can help keep our own costs down. So as well as serving economic justice, Brexit, if we make the right decisions, can serve social justice too. But more than that, Brexit, with the right decisions, can enhance our natural environment. And that's why I'm so delighted by the range of speakers and indeed the sheer breadth of issues to be addressed at today's conference, because I think the potential for progressive change is huge. But that change can only be made real if we utilise the talents of everyone who cares about the natural world. And I'm very well aware that for many who care deeply about the environment, our membership of the European Union coincided with both increased awareness of environmental concerns and improved mechanisms to safeguard the natural world. And as I mentioned earlier, leaving the EU, for many, appeared to put those gains at risk, or at the very least, it raised a question over the prospect of continued progress. And it's because I appreciate the strength of those concerns that we in DEFRA have moved as quickly as we can to affirm that not only will there be no abandonment of the environmental principles that we've adopted in our time in the EU, but indeed we aim to strengthen environmental protection measures and to create new mechanisms to incentivise environmental improvement. And that's why we're consulting on how to introduce a new environmental protection body. And it's why we've outlined policies for the natural world in our 25-year environment plan that, in some cases, are more ambitious than any required of EU membership. Now, I recognise that some of the ambitions in the plan will need legislative underpinning. And while I can't say now what will be in future Queen's speeches, I can state clearly that if we are to honour our pledge to leave the environment in a better state than we inherited it, we must also leave the statute book in a better state than we inherited it. And, in advance of any major legislation, we're also determined at DEFRA to show that we're making progress as rapidly as possible towards meeting the goals that we've set for ourselves in our environment plan. And that's why we're planning to go further, shortly, in dealing with the pollution caused by single-use plastics and building on our plastic bag and plastic microbead bans. I'm also determined, as we've been reminded today by the House of Commons, that the UK must do more to clean up our air, And I want to create stronger incentives for us to do so, and I will set out further proposals on this in a clean air strategy later in the spring. Because to be frank, as the House of Commons again reminds us today, we have been too slow to act on what is a major public health scandal. And again, we'll be saying more in coming weeks, but we all know that we have to do more to restrict diesel use, to protect urban centres from pollution, to change how some of us heat our homes, and we also need to reform aspects of agriculture and industry to ensure our air is properly breathable. And in acting in this way, I believe that this government is being true, actually, to the best conservative traditions, because it was Disraeli's government that recognised improving public health depended on passing enlightened environmental legislation. His administration introduced laws to safeguard our rivers. The great third Marquess of Salisbury's government introduced laws on housing. Macmillan's introduced laws on air quality, and Margaret Thatcher's on a range of environmental issues, all of which reflected a profound appreciation of the interdependence of a healthy environment, a healthy population, and a flourishing economy. And I recognise that it's a stock in trade of some political commentary that you can only really pursue environmental goods at the expense of consumers or business. There are some who say that you can pursue greenery or prosperity, but you can't put a premium on both. And indeed, that was the line that was doggedly asserted by the BBC's Nick Robinson when he interviewed me on the Today programme for the launch of our 25-year environment plan. But even when that case is prosecuted with all the vigour and talent of a Nick Robinson, I believe, and I believe that history shows, that it's a false dichotomy. The truth, as governments have long understood, is that you cannot sustain economic growth if you erode the natural capital on which all human flourishing depends. And in parallel, sustainable economic growth will generate the income that we all then can invest in future, further environmental enhancement. Because it's been economic growth, free market-inspired, capitalist-generated, and business-driven, that has helped us to secure cleaner rivers, cleaner and less carbon-intensive energy, and to protect natural habitats in the world's wealthiest nations. And unfortunately, history tells us that centralised state control, socialist management, and the absence of effective price signals in functioning markets, and indeed the expropriation of private property and collectivisation, have led not just to economic misery, but also to environmental degradation. And the example of Mao's China, Soviet Russia, and Maduro's Venezuela shows that that path leads to poisoned soils, contaminated rivers, toxic air, and wrecked habitats. Indeed, the economic policies pursued by the leaders of the Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, who have such enthusiastic fans here in the UK, I name no names. Those policies have involved the grotesquely profligate exploitation of fossil fuel reserves in a manner that has been both economically foolish and environmentally reckless, and that has been accompanied by the immiseration of the nation's population, provoking not just the migration of millions of refugees, but also the devastation of that country's rural economy. So poor and hungry have Venezuela's citizens become under Chavez and Maduro that they were driven to eat the animals in Caracas Zoo to keep alive. As a metaphor for how economic failure drives the destruction of the natural world, it's both all too fitting and heartbreaking. But while open and enlightened market economies have done a demonstrably better job in delivering environmental goods than closed command economies, we've also got to be honest about where our economic thinking has been deficient in recent years. Just as growth in the first decade in this century was over-reliant on debt, on borrowing that we expected the next generation to pay for, so growth over many decades has been over-reliant on exploiting finite natural resources whose depletion inevitably leaves future generations poorer. As a conservative, someone who believes in the careful husbanding of resources, both financial and environmental, and as someone who also believes in the principle of stewardship, the idea that we must hand on our inheritance to the next generation in an enhanced state, I believe that we have a responsibility to ensure that our economic model prices in those valuable principles. In other words, we have to have truly sustainable economic growth. And that's why I'm such an enthusiast for the idea of natural capital, pioneered by the brilliant economist Dieter Helm, from whom you'll be hearing later this morning. Dieter developed the idea, the concept of natural capital accounting, which aims to measure every natural asset, from fresh water to the oceans, oil and gas stocks to fish stocks, woodland to peat, and record how the assets are changing over time, both in physical and financial terms. The UK was the first country in the world to establish an independent natural capital committee to advise the government on how to manage and enhance our natural wealth. And that committee has been playing a critical role in the formulation and implementation of our 25-year environment plan. The insights of the Natural Capital Committee have ensured that this government recognises that natural capital is as fundamental to our health and prosperity in the future as human capital or physical capital. Now, of course, it's important to note that natural capital is just one tool that we can use to deliver on environmental gains. Not everything that we cherish in the natural world can be given a monetary value. We don't want to protect and restore the environment simply because of its economic value, but because of our moral duty and our emotional attachment. But still, natural capital remains a powerful tool for all of us who care about the environment and prosperity in the future to ensure that we take our responsibilities towards the environment seriously and we can be held accountable for our actions. So as we design the economic and environmental policies that will guide Britain after Brexit, our aim will be to ensure that we incentivise investment in physical, in human, but above all in natural capital. And the prosperity of our economy, and in particular our food economy, depends on us developing a truly sustainable approach for the future, and in particular towards our landscape. So as we escape from the common agricultural policy and develop our own domestic farming policy, we have to move away from our current system, which lacks effective incentives for long-term thinking, to one that promotes investment in our shared future. And that will mean that we pay farmers to improve the quality and fertility of their soil. That means we want to reverse the trends of the past, which have led to compaction and runoff, and which have polluted our rivers and choked our fish. Supporting those who practice min or no-till cultivation in agriculture is not only better for our rivers and watercourses, it will also help to control and reduce carbon emissions, it will reduce demand for chemical inputs, and it will provide a richer habitat for insects and invertebrates. And we should indeed, as we revise our policy towards our land and embed natural capital thinking in our approach, move to provide far better support for farmers and the land managers who maintain, restore or create precious habitats for wildlife. Whether it's supporting those who are protecting curlews on moorland or ensuring the health of sphagnum moss and blanket bog, the stewards of precious natural assets, which Britain has a special role in conserving, need improved support in the future. And that will be at the heart of our environmental, agricultural and economic policies post-Brexit. And as well as reforming the common agricultural policy to reward those who provide habitats on land, leaving the EU also provides us with an opportunity to escape from the common fisheries policy and to replace it with an approach to managing our marine environment, which puts conservation and sustainability at the heart of our approach towards our own territorial waters. Effective reform in these areas will of course depend on also enabling the right sort of technological and scientific breakthroughs. And freedom to innovate in these policy areas should, I hope, also provide new opportunities for the burgeoning growth in environmental entrepreneurship which we see in Britain. From the appropriate surveillance of fishing activity to the use of artificial intelligence to improve farm animal health, we can be world leaders in demonstrating how we can both increase our natural capital on land and at sea and also boost national productivity. And there is, I'm delighted to say, continued and intense interest in British environmental technology and innovation because we excel in agri-tech and in supporting this innovation through green finance. There were more than 58,000 tech startups in the UK in 2017, and more venture capital has been invested in technology in London than in Germany, France, Spain and Ireland combined. A new business starts every 75 seconds, and many have the potential to change how we define prosperity and how we enhance natural capital. New companies like Saturn Bioponics are leading the way with new modular growing systems that allow farmers to increase crop density while making harvesting cleaner and easier, reducing labour costs by up to 50% and producing an almost 100% saleable yield. Overall, Saturn Bioponics have shown that investment in their technology will be paid back between 1 and 4 years through increased profitability. And government, critically, has a positive role to play in helping to enable this sort of innovation. Just this week, an investment of £90 million from the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund was directed towards the Transforming Food Production programme. And investments like this will, I believe, help support a technology and data-driven transformation for UK farmers, UK land managers, and those who work on or with our environment. And by supporting farmers with this type of initial investment, we can help their businesses to not only become more productive and to generate more growth and indeed to provide high-skilled jobs for the future, we can also drive high-value export opportunities, and critically, we can also ensure that our environment becomes more resilient and we become better guardians of the natural world. And across the UK at the moment, there are a wealth of innovative startups redefining what it means to be a farmer or a land manager and how to farm effectively and sustainably. One company, Hummingbird Technologies, uses crop mapping to identify problems in drainage, compaction, nutrition, weeds and pests before they become devastating. And it can preemptively detect the presence of particular diseases like potato blight and blackgrass. And it's also the case that our universities, like Harper Adams, who've been collaborating with a number of tech companies, have helped to lead the charge on developments in agronomy and agritech, and in particular, the world has been paying attention to the way in which Harper Adams, through its hands-free hectare project, has shown the way for a more efficient and environmentally sensitive approach towards agriculture. And I believe that we can also, as well as demonstrating global leadership in all these areas, also demonstrate it in our approach towards resource efficiency and the treatment of waste. We all know that we need to reduce our reliance on plastic and in particular make sure that the incentives are there to move away from the use of virgin products so that we all use more recycled material. And I recognise that we need to reform the existing producer responsibility scheme. We need to impose appropriate costs on those whose products leave a heavier environmental footprint, and we then need to use the money generated from that to invest in dramatically improved recycling facilities in this country. And in the same spirit, we also need to encourage movement away from diesel and petrol cars towards ultra-low emission vehicles, such as those that Sir James Dyson is developing. And we should also build on the work that's being done to develop autonomous vehicles in the future. Their development can help us further reduce the adverse environmental impact of our current approach towards urban transport. I believe that Britain has the potential now to demonstrate global leadership in all these and more areas. And there are opportunities in the months ahead for us to demonstrate alongside other nations our determination to do more for our planet. At the forthcoming Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and with Canada's presidency of the G7, we can play our part to extend protection to more of the world's oceans. At the Illegal Wildlife Trade Summit in London this autumn, we can take decisive steps to safeguard biodiversity worldwide, and indeed we can, in the months ahead, develop new approaches to measuring, valuing, and enhancing biodiversity worldwide. And we can also ensure, in the new trade agreements that we hope to sign, and indeed in the economic partnership that we plan to forge with the EU, that natural capital will be protected, that the natural world will be respected, and that the highest ethical and environmental standards will be upheld. Because a commitment to the highest environmental standards in everything we do won't involve long-term economic sacrifice, quite the opposite. We will only succeed in the world as a food exporter, as a centre for tourism, as a hub for technology investment, and as an incubator for wider innovation on the basis that we are an economy and a society where quality, integrity, sustainability, and a commitment to long-term relationships are guaranteed. We need to build an economy and a society which continually promotes incentives to virtue. There are great prizes for our resourceful, resilient, remarkable nation in the years ahead, and I hope that with the help of all the people gathered here for this conference, that we can succeed in the years ahead in building something special in this, our green and pleasant land. Thank you all very much. Thank you.